Putin is willing to weaponize energy, and we face the strategic challenge of a more assertive China, we must be smarter about protecting our economic security. But our opponents are profoundly wrong to argue that the shocks that we've seen in the last few years, or the need to transition to net zero, mean we should borrow £28 billion a year and permanently have bigger government. We should be as clear-eyed about government failure as we are about market failure. And so the bar to intervene in people's lives should be high, because history tells us that if it's not, the inevitable conclusion is higher spending, higher borrowing, higher mortgage rates, and higher taxes. Greater regulation and intervention, stifling people's energy and initiative. Less trade, meaning less choice and higher prices, and economic power concentrated in the hands of a small government elite, allowing more influence for vested interests than the trade unions. This is a recipe for stagnation, not growth. And it would take our country backwards, not forwards. So we choose a different path to deliver growth, where we back people and businesses, where the state is there for you during the bad times but gets out of the way during the good, and where the path to prosperity lies not in ever more government intervention, but in creating the conditions for businesses to thrive. And so, to grow the economy, we will take 5 long-term decisions. Reducing debt, cutting tax and rewarding hard work, building domestic sustainable energy, backing British business, and delivering world-class education. The first long-term decision is to reduce our debt, to keep inflation falling and get mortgage rates down to affordable levels. Without financial security, we can't do anything to support families and workers when they need it most. When COVID struck, we could only act because our public finances were in good shape, thanks to the difficult but responsible decisions that were taken over the past decade. Now, I'll always be proud of being the Chancellor who protected 9 million jobs. And in a moment of danger, fear, and uncertainty, people turned to this government and did not find us wanting. I'm proud of the support that we've provided to the NHS with record levels of funding. I'm proud too of helping households pay their energy bills when Putin cut off the gas. But the only way to give people the peace of mind that government will be there in future crises is to pay down our debts now. And if we don't, we're just leaving our children to pay the bill. Last September was a stark reminder of why this matters so much. The country was rocked by a financial crisis caused in part because investors didn't believe the UK had a plan to control our debt. And we should remember what happened last time the Labour Party were in power. Their attitude to the public finances was so cavalier, they actually left a note behind saying, "There's no money left." They made a joke out of it. I will never do that. That's why the Chancellor and I have taken difficult decisions to control our debt. That wasn't the easy thing to do, but it was the right thing to do for our country. And that's what leadership means. And contrast that with our political opponents. Now, they talk the talk, but frankly, the rhetoric is the easy part. It takes political courage to take the difficult but right decisions for the long term. And the truth is, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves tried to block or opportunistically oppose almost every major decision we took to get our debt falling. And if they get the chance, they'll make the problem even worse, continuing the big government, big spending approach of the pandemic and promising to borrow a further £28 billion a year. And this makes the same economic mistake as last year's mini-budget. Blowing tens of billions of pounds on unfunded spending is just as dangerous as blowing tens of billions of pounds on unfunded tax cuts. It's taking the easy way out, and the result is the same: higher inflation, financial insecurity, and more debt for our children and grandchildren. You know, I won't allow that to happen. I was willing to resign from the previous government over this. I was even willing to lose a leadership election over this. So you'd better believe me when I say that the difference is real. I will do what is necessary to get our debt down and provide financial security. The second decision that we're taking is to cut tax and reward hard work. Now, I want to cut taxes. I believe in cutting taxes. What clearer expression could there be of my governing philosophy than the belief that people and not governments make the best decisions about their money? But doing that responsibly is hard. We must avoid doing anything that puts at risk our progress in controlling inflation. And no matter how much we might want them to, history shows that tax cuts don't automatically pay for themselves. And I can't click my fingers and suddenly wish away all the reasons that taxes had to increase in the first place. Partly because of COVID and Putin's war in Ukraine, and partly because we want to support people to live in dignity in retirement, with a decent pension and good health care, which will cost more as the population ages. But my argument has never been that we shouldn't cut taxes. It's been that we could only cut taxes once we've controlled inflation and debt. First cut inflation, then cut taxes. And that's why I made the promise to halve inflation. And the official statistics show that promise has now been met. So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritize. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes. Rewarding hard work also means reforming our welfare system. We believe in the inherent dignity of a good job, and we believe that work, not welfare, is the best route out of poverty. Yet right now, around 2 million people of working age are not working at all. That is a national scandal and an enormous waste of human potential. So we must do more to support those who can work to do so. And we will clamp down on welfare fraudsters, because the system must be fair for taxpayers who fund it. And by doing all of this, by getting people off welfare into work, we can better support those genuinely in need of a safety net. So work for those who can, a generous safety net for those who can't, and tougher penalties for fraudsters. That is what a compassionate, conservative welfare system looks like. Our third long-term decision is to build domestic, sustainable energy. Now, energy security is national security. It underpins everything in our economy, so there can be no plan for growth without it. And the transition to net zero will create whole new sectors and hundreds of thousands of good, well-paid jobs right across the country. Yet there is almost no better example of how British politics has failed in recent decades than our inability to develop a serious strategy for energy. We're now correcting those mistakes with new nuclear power plants, record investment in renewables, and upgrades to our electricity grid infrastructure. But there is no path to energy security, and indeed no credible path to net zero, without secure supplies of oil and gas. Never again can we allow our energy security to be compromised. Now, I believe British energy will deliver British energy security. Now, but my political opponents would ban new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea, leaving us more reliant on insecure foreign supplies, sacrificing our energy security in favor of relying on despots like Putin. Virtue signaling instead of doing what is hard-headed and right for the national interest. And you can see that same attitude in their approach to net zero. Now, I deeply believe that when you ask most people about climate change, they want to do the right thing. And I'm proud that since 1990, Britain has reduced our emissions faster than any other major economy. But it can't be right to impose such significant costs on working people, especially those already struggling to make ends meet, and to interfere so much in people's lives without a properly informed national debate. Yet that is precisely what my political opponents would do, forcing families to pay 5, 10, £15,000 in home upgrades. And that's the choice. Instead of following the path of ideological zeal, reaching net zero no matter what the cost, or to build new supplies of domestic sustainable energy to grow the economy and cut the cost of net zero for working people. The fourth decision we're taking is to back British businesses to invest, innovate, and trade. Now that might sound obvious or uncontroversial, but it points to a fundamental choice. Now my opponent's every instinct is a form of industrial strategy that's about picking winners, borrowing to provide expensive subsidies, regulating more, and intervening even more. And the result would be the same as it always is: higher borrowing, higher taxes, higher inflation, and vested interests, trade unions gaining even more influence. And just look at what the Labour parties say that they'll do. They'll repeal the legislation which gives everyone emergency healthcare even during the strikes. They'll allow unions to bring the entire country to a standstill with the support of just a third of their members. And they're proposing sweeping new regulations, making it harder for businesses to hire new workers. Now, our approach is different. We want to support businesses to invest, innovate, and grow through lower taxes and simpler regulation. And where we provide support, it should be targeted and strategic. So yes, we're investing in roads, railways, broadband, mobile networks right across the country. Yes, we're delivering one of the biggest ever transport upgrades for the North and the Midlands in Network North. And yes, we're delivering the right homes in the right places to support the labour market. But growth is all about getting the private sector to invest too. And that's why the Chancellor is cutting taxes directly on investment. And it's why we're cutting taxes to encourage innovation, because new ideas and ways of doing things are the most important way to raise our productivity. And it's why we're seizing the freedom and flexibility of Brexit. We've already cut Brussels red tape to save small businesses £1 billion a year. We're creating more agile regulation to support innovation and competition, and particularly in growth sectors like financial services, life sciences, and agri-tech. And we're building new trade deals with the fastest growing regions in the world, like CPTPP. And it makes no sense to deny ourselves those opportunities by aligning more closely with EU rules that we would have no say over as the opposition would. So this is our message to business. The Chancellor and I spent most of our careers in business. We understand, we care, we get it, and we're acting to make this the best country in the world to do business. Now, our final long-term decision is about delivering world-class education, so young people have the skills they need to get good jobs. Education is about opportunity, about giving people the knowledge and skills to get on in life and fulfill their aspirations, and about preparing the country for the profound transformation technologies like AI will bring. I'm incredibly proud of our record since 2010. Higher standards, more choice for parents, more powers for teachers, and the result? State schools in some of the most deprived parts of our country are now producing some of the best results. And we are doing more. Our new qualification, the Advanced British Standard, will for the first time put technical education on an equal footing with academic courses, dramatically increase time spent in the classroom, teach maths and English to every child through to 18 with extra help for those struggling the most, and give students the chance to study a much broader range of subjects. And we know that brilliant teachers make for a brilliant education, so we're going to back them. We've doubled the grants for new teachers in key subjects to £30,000 over 5 years, and for the first time extended those grants to colleges as well as schools. And again, there's an important choice for the country here. The opposition opposed our reforms to make our kids the best readers in the Western world. They still cling to the false dream that young people can only get on in life if they go to university. And we know that if they get into power, they plan to cut apprenticeship numbers by half. Compare that with our plans for more teachers, higher standards, and more apprenticeships. It tells you everything about the choice on education in this country. Now, to conclude, the first time most of you saw me was during COVID, when I stood up at a press conference to announce the furlough scheme. From that moment until today, whether you like me or not, I hope you know that when it comes to the economy, when it comes to your job, your family, your incomes, I'll always take the right decisions for our country. I promised you we would halve inflation. We took the difficult decisions, and we have delivered on that promise. So now you can trust me when I say that we can start to responsibly cut taxes. And we will now move to the next phase of our plan to grow our economy by reducing debt, cutting tax and rewarding hard work, building domestic sustainable energy, backing British business, and delivering world-class education. You can trust me to take the right long-term decisions, and that's how we'll build a brighter future for all our children. Thank you. Thank you. Right, we turn to some questions from the media. Can I start with the BBC? Sorry, microphone somewhere.
Morning, Prime Minister. Ione Wells, BBC News. Could you give us some specific examples of any changes to personal tax that you think would promote growth but not be inflationary?
Well, thanks, Ione, for the question. Look, I'm not going to, I feel I might be saying this one or two more times today, but I'm not going to speculate or comment on individual tax changes. That will be for the Chancellor on Wednesday. But, you know, what I will say for a bit of context is the following, right? The fact that we're even having this conversation, the fact that you can even ask that question is because we took the difficult decisions to halve inflation and we delivered on that pledge. And that's why we can now move on to the next phase of our economic plan and turn our attention to cutting taxes, right? So I think we have to take a moment to recognise the fact that we're even here having this conversation is because the Chancellor and I took a series of decisions that were not easy, that took political courage and leadership to do, but because we've delivered that, we now can start to talk about cutting taxes. And that's something that wasn't always a given. You know, I remember there were many months when everyone said we weren't going to do this, it wasn't going to happen. It was a great albatross hanging around our necks, but we stuck to our guns, stuck to the plan, and have delivered for the country. And that's why I'm pleased that we're in this position. Now, look, you know, that still means that we have to be serious and responsible at how we go about cutting taxes. That's what people will expect from the Chancellor and I. That's what we'll deliver. We can't do everything all at once. I think as the Chancellor rightly said yesterday, if you read some of the papers, you'd think that there'd be no taxes left after Wednesday. So we do have to be disciplined, we need to prioritise, and we need to focus on the supply side of our economy. Now, you know, that's our overall approach, and you'll have more details of that on Wednesday. But the key thing is, it's because of the difficult decisions that we took to halve inflation that we can now move on to this next phase of our economic plan and turn our attention to cutting taxes. We will do so seriously, we will do so responsibly, but that time is now here. Next, can I turn to ITV?
Robert Peston, ITV. We've heard your determination to cut the taxes and debt, but be honest with the British people, there is no scenario in which the tax and debt burdens, that's tax as a share of GDP, debt as a share of GDP, can fall in the year or so before the general election. You also mentioned that you're going to protect people who can't work. So with food inflation still running at 10%, gas price 60% higher than 2 years ago, isn't this the moment to confirm that you will raise universal credit by the September higher inflation figure, and you'll raise pensions by the normal earnings figure that includes bonuses?
Thanks, Robert. Look, a couple of things in there about debt and also about welfare and pensions. So look, on debt, it's worth bearing in mind what's happened to the country over the past few years. We've had a once-in-a-century pandemic and then a war in Ukraine, which has caused energy prices to spiral. Right? That is the primary reason that our debt had to rise, because we had to provide considerable support to the country, the NHS notably, but also families for the energy support schemes, and also initiatives like furlough to protect people's jobs. Those were the right decisions, and they happen for a very particular set of reasons. But since then, the Chancellor and I started that work as Chancellor, have taken a series of decisions to bring our debt under control. And those aren't easy. Whether it was in a disciplined approach to public sector pay, whether it was making a change on our aid spending, whether it was making sure that the temporary support that we put in place during the pandemic was genuinely temporary, as it should be. Now, as I said, the Labour Party, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, I said they talked the talk on wanting to be disciplined. They opposed each and every one of those decisions. Right? It is rank hypocrisy, on the one hand, to say that you stand for sensible public finances, but whenever it actually comes to a decision that is difficult to get your debt under control, that you oppose it cynically. Right? That's not leadership. That's not how you run an economy sensibly. You have to do difficult things, and that's what the Chancellor and I have done. And because we've done those difficult things, actually, when the Chancellor delivered the spring budget, debt was already forecast to be lower than it was in autumn when I became Prime Minister. We were meeting our fiscal rules to have debt falling in the 5-year time horizon, which is what the fiscal framework is, and we will continue to deliver that. That's because it's important to the Chancellor. It's important about giving financial security for our children, all the young people that are here, because if you're a politician and you're in these jobs and you're not willing to take a difficult decision, what you're essentially doing is just racking up bills on the country's credit card and passing it to all the young people that are here and asking them to pick it up when they grow up. I don't think that's morally right, and it's also not economically prudent. So that's the approach we've taken, and we will continue to deliver that approach. And as I said, the question is for the Labour Party as to why, when every opportunity has come to actually support something that's difficult, they haven't. They've opposed it and shied away from it. And as I say, you'll see something very different from us. We're not going to borrow £28 billion a year extra, because that would just make debt worse. So you talk about what's happening to debt, borrowing £28 billion a year as the Labour Party want to, will make debt go up. It will not improve financial security. It will pass bills to all the young people that are here today, and I don't think that's right. Now, on welfare, I'm not going to preempt the decisions that will be made and announced on Wednesday, but look, our view on the welfare system is that it should be compassionate, it should be fair, and it should be sustainable. And our track record over the past year or two in particular is that we have stepped in to support those who need our help the most when times were difficult. Just this year, the most vulnerable families on welfare are receiving £900 additional support in cost of living payments. This winter Christmas, pensioners, 12 million, are going to receive up to an extra £300 each alongside their winter fuel payment to help them with energy bills, because we know things are difficult this year and have been. Now, we will continue to take that approach, compassionate but also fair and sustainable. I made the points in the speech, with over 2 million people of working age who are not currently working. That isn't a good situation. It's not sustainable for the country, for taxpayers, it's not fair, but it's also not compassionate to write people off. And over a decade, we've seen the percentage of people who are essentially deemed not to be able to do any work has tripled, right? That doesn't seem like a system that's working properly, and that's why, we will look to make sure that the system is reformed and supports those who can work to do so. But as I said, our record over the past year is to support those who need our help. I'm proud of that, and it's not over yet. As I said, this Christmas and beyond, more support is there. Next, could we go to LBC?
Prime Minister, Fraser Knight from LBC. You say on personal tax cuts you can't do it all at once. Would you say, and can you promise, that after this week's autumn budget, people will feel better off?
Again, Fraser, just not to repeat what I said before and not to get drawn on the individual taxes, but again, it's because we've taken the difficult decisions to halve inflation that we are already starting to be able to make an impact to people's cost of living. I described in the speech, you've heard it from the Chancellor in the past. Inflation acts like a tax, right? It eats into your pay packet, it makes your savings, your pensions worth less, it pushes up the cost of your mortgage, it makes everything more expensive when you do your weekly shop. And that's why the most important priority we had as a government was to halve inflation. It was the single biggest thing we could do to ease the burden on the cost of living and to make people's life a bit easier. And that's why I'm pleased that we've delivered it. Now, look, the job is not done. I'm not saying that at all. I know people are still struggling, but we have now had 3 months where people's wages in general are rising faster than prices. That's welcome, but we need to stick to the plan. We need to make sure that we keep a lid on borrowing and debt, because that's how we'll continue to bring inflation down. And that is the biggest tax cut that we could have delivered to people to make them feel better off over the past year. And that's why we are now able to be in this next phase and turn our attention to cutting taxes. Again, I'm not going to get into individual decisions, but I will say that our priority has always been the supply side of our economy. We're keen to get the economy growing, and now that we've got inflation down, we can start to have that conversation about how best to do that. Next, could we turn to the Mail?
Prime Minister, recent polling shows that more voters now think Labour is the party of low taxes compared to the Conservatives. How concerned are you about that perception, and how quickly will you act to change it?
Well, what I'd say is people should just look at what's happened over the past few years. And as I said, I'm being very honest about the fact that we had to take a bunch of decisions. Those were the result of a once-in-a-century pandemic, right? And then a war in Ukraine that meant energy bills spiraled because Putin weaponized energy supplies. So if people are saying that we shouldn't have responded to any of those things, we shouldn't have stepped in to support the NHS, people's families, their businesses, help with energy bills, and therefore then have to pay for that, then fair enough. But I don't remember anyone saying that at the time, least of all the Labour Party. And this is what I say, that there's just, I think, just opportunistic approach to this. And there's a serious moment coming, right? When we have an election, there's going to be a very clear choice of that election. And do you want a government and a party that is committed to bringing down borrowing and debt and controlling public spending so that we can cut taxes? Or do you want a government and a party that is committed to borrowing £28 billion more? Because there's no way that if you're going to borrow £28 billion more, that you're going to be able to cut people's taxes. It's as simple as that, right? So, as I said, I know a thing or two about this. I believe in it passionately. I was willing to resign from government over this. I was willing to lose a leadership election over this because I believe in it so much, right? And there is no way that you can borrow that amount of money and tell the British people that that is not going to have an impact on inflation, on interest rates, and ultimately on their taxes. It's as simple as that. And that will be the very clear choice at the next election. A Conservative Party that is delivering lower taxes because we have now halved inflation and control spending, or a Labour Party that's just going to borrow an enormous amount more, not having learnt the lessons at all of not just the last 10 years, but of the last 2 years, and continue with the same failed prescription, which is more government, more borrowing, more spending. That does not lead to lower taxes for people. We've seen it time and time again, and you will see a clear contrast from us. Next, I'll go to the Times.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. You're here to celebrate meeting the pledge to halve inflation, but your pledge to stop the boats has hit a setback after last week's Supreme Court ruling. What's your message, therefore, to Cabinet Ministers who have reservations about disapplying the Human Rights Act and ignoring the ECHR in asylum cases? And I'm sure many of your colleagues will be keenly watching upcoming net migration statistics. Are you confident net migration will come down compared to last year? Thank you.
So I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk about our boats pledge. So when I stood up and made those 5 pledges, the 5th of those was to stop the boats. Because I think this is a massive priority for the country, and it's a huge priority for me and the government as well. And it gives me an opportunity to make the point that we're making considerable progress on that pledge. Now, when I stood up and made that, in the last few years, the number of small boats crossings had quadrupled in just the last 2 or 3 years, with no prospect of them coming down, and they were forecast to continue increasing. And indeed, that is what has happened across Europe this year. Crossings have continued to go up, particularly in the central Mediterranean, where they've almost doubled. What's happened here? the number of people crossing is down by a third. That hasn't happened by accident. That's happened because this government has taken a series of decisions, worked very hard, worked with other countries, tightened up our system, returned 20,000 people, done a new deal with Albania, cooperated with the French, Bulgaria and Turkey to intervene upstream, increased the number of illegal migration raids, cracked through the backlog. And because of all of that, the number of people coming here is down by a third. Right? Nobody, when I stood up and made that pledge, thought that was remotely possible. So that's the progress we've already made on that pledge. And again, job is not done. We need to finish the job, and that's why we need to get the Rwanda scheme up and running. And I'm completely committed to doing what is necessary to get those flights off and that scheme up and running. Because we had prepared for all circumstances, we have been working on a new treaty with Rwanda that will address all the concerns that were raised by the Supreme Court. And we will combine that with new emergency legislation that will make it crystal clear and give Parliament the opportunity to confirm that Rwanda, for all of these purposes, is a safe place to implement our scheme. And I won't let a foreign court stop us from getting flights off to Rwanda. This is a reasonable country. This is a reasonable government. But people's patience has run thin, and we have got to end this merry-go-round, and that is what I am determined to do. Next and lastly, before we melt, let's go to the sun.
Prime Minister, given your freezing of income tax thresholds has led to a record tax haul, would it just make more sense to lower the thresholds rather than take with one hand and give away with the other in tinkering?
Actually, well, Ryan, I'm not going to get into, again, individual tax policy, and I'll just say what I said before. You know, did I and the government have to make some difficult decisions on tax over the last few years? Yes. Why? Because we suffered a once-in-a-generation pandemic and a war in Ukraine, and we decided rightly to provide considerable support to the country during that. And given everything that happened, you do have to be able to pay for that. And we saw last summer and when Labour were last in office what happens if you don't have a credible plan to keep your borrowing and debt under control. So those were the right decisions. But because we've now been able to halve inflation, and because the economy has outperformed, and I think it's important to make that point too, right? It's not just about the fact that we've halved inflation. You know, when I came into office and Jeremy and I were sitting down, everyone said that there was going to be a recession this year. Most of the people probably sitting in this room commentating, but also the Bank of England, the OBR, the IMF, and the OECD, everyone said that this country would suffer a recession this year. Now, because again of the policies that we've put in place and because of our management of the economy, that recession has been averted. The economy has performed far better than anybody thought. Revenues are up, and the combination of that plus us delivering our pledge to halve inflation means that we are now in a position to turn our attention to cutting taxes. And again, I'm not going to preempt the decisions that the Chancellor will make, other than to say that we will approach that task seriously and responsibly. We can't do everything at once, as I said. We will prioritise, we will be disciplined, and our focus is very much the supply side and growing the economy. But what I can say is, as you heard in my speech, you know, we believe very much in an economy where the government is doing less and allowing people to keep more of their own money, right? That is the long-term direction of travel. That is what we passionately believe as Conservatives, you know, but we have to get there in a responsible and serious way and do things in a measured fashion that doesn't put at risk our inflationary accomplishments so far, because we want to keep getting inflation down. But I'm comfortable that we can do that, and as I said, the fact that we can have all these questions about cutting taxes is a testament to the fact that we have delivered our pledge early to halve inflation, and that's because of the responsible but difficult decisions that we took, and each and every one of them were opposed by the Labour Party. And it gives you a very clear sense of the contrast that will be there at the next election. Thank you very much.